And so I'm sitting there crying myself to sleep at night in this high school gym, thinking I never, ever want to be in this situation again. I had no money. I couldn't get a hotel room. I was broken. I have a 6-month waiting list and I was making more money than I could spend. And I had never been as miserable in my life. Placebo controlled with sham surgery. And what they found was the people who had sham surgery versus the real surgery for this had no difference in their results.
We just had the most incredible conversation with Dr. John Temple about how he left modern medicine to holistic medicine and why he left profit for purpose.
Truly one of the most incredible conversations I've ever had with someone. Watching someone start and have such a unique story to tell, and tune in. I promise it's worth it. He covers everything from the insurance companies to where all of this money is coming from, what's happening with all of these patients, why do so many people need knee replacements. This is just truly an eye-opening conversation with someone who has seen it all and is now kind of on the other side of it. And so you want to listen to this episode.
Hi, this is Peyton.
And I'm Rachel.
And we have a very exciting episode. We have a special guest here with us tonight, and he is someone that has extensive background in the medical industry, specifically orthopedic surgery. Dr. John Temple actually left traditional medicine after 20 plus years. So John, if you want to go ahead and give us a little bit more of a background.
Sure. First of all, thank you guys so much for having me. It's a very non-traditional story, as I've said, so I'm happy to tell it. So I was an orthopedic surgeon for about 20 years. And when I say I was, it's pretty rare for an orthopedic surgeon to leave orthopedic surgery. We were at the high end of the food chain, as they say. And I think to kind of discuss why I left it, it's probably worthwhile getting into why I went into it in the first place. So I was a senior in high school and had no intention of being a doctor. I was never one of these kids who grew up said, "Oh, I'm going to be a doctor when I grow up." I wanted to be scientist / engineer, inventor, very sciencey. But I was also athletic. And so my senior in high school, we go to the state championship, play at Chapel Hill. I missed a 3 at the buzzer that would have sent it to overtime. Anyhow, my life's on top of the world. I get a basketball scholarship to go play basketball down at Winthrop. And my plan is to go be a scientist and it's settled. Well, life throws all sorts of wrenches at you. Within 1 year, my dad split, sort of ran off with someone. My sister got pregnant and left the family to go get married and have a child. And my mom tossed me out of the house for several reasons. So within a year of that, I found myself living in my high school gym that summer, and it was pretty miserable. And my coach in high school had given me a key to the gym so I could work on my shooting. And so I'm sitting there crying myself to sleep at night in this high school gym, thinking I never, ever want to be in this situation again. I had no money. I couldn't get a hotel room. I was broke. And all I said at that point is I will never be in this situation again. And I will do something that's going to make me financially independent so I don't have to be in this position again. So we get through that summer, the dorm opens back up, thank God. And so my school was paid for since I was on scholarship. And I went back to school and I met the team orthopedic doctor who came in just to do training room. And he pulls up in a Mercedes and I'm like, okay, he's driving a Mercedes. And I just said, "What do you do?" He goes, "Well, I work with my hands and I have to understand science and I work with athletes and I make good money." And I said that day, I'm going to go do that.
Wow. I had no idea. And what an interesting story that's what led you to orthopedic surgery. Because if you wanted to make money, there's so many opportunities for that. But it's interesting that you chose orthopedic surgery.
It's interesting.
One of the hardest careers.
It's interesting how just a person who seemingly would not have had been an integral role in your path, because you crossed path with that person at that time, in that frame of mind, with that mindset, just given everything that you had already been through, that was kind of, what if you had met someone else that day?
You're right. And it's truly just a matter of happenstance. And, I grew up in inner city Detroit, and my dad was a cop and my mom was a secretary. So I never even met an investment banker or these other positions. So I just didn't have the world knowledge to know, okay, what are other ways I could go solve my financial problem?
Sure.
Well, I wish I could tell you I had this, this heartfelt altruistic reason for going into medicine, but it really was just to solve. So I never had to sleep in my high school gym again. Was the reason.
You know what? That's still a tough story, and I don't think anyone can fault you for that. So, why don't you kind of continue, you know, so you went into orthopedic surgery. What was your next move after that? You get in this field, you're obviously doing really well. Explain kind of what opened your eyes.
Sure. Well, so so I had a clear purpose, and orthopedic, the residency and the training is grueling, and it was miserable, frankly. And I get into practice, and I'm off to the races. And I joined a very revenue motivated group and a very production driven group, a large group, and I took off running, and I took everyone else's call, and I worked my ass off, and very, built a very successful and lucrative practice. And I got to the point where, we were living paycheck to paycheck, and I would put all my balances on one credit card and then wait 6 months and then move it to another credit card. And at this point now I have two children who are depending on me and potentially a third on the way. And the great thing is my practice started taking off. And the thing with orthopedics, even though I never was truly in love with it growing up, I was good at it. I fit with it. I was good with my hands, and it just fit with what I was good at, even though I wasn't loving doing it, but it was solving a problem. So I got about 8 to 10 years in, and my practice is incredibly busy, and I have a 6-month waiting list, and I was making more money than I could spend. And I had never been as miserable in my life. And so when I hear your podcast as a Sunday remedy, I was the guy laying in the fetal position and Sunday evenings dreading having to go back, just dreading it.
Yeah.
And Friday afternoon, I would drive home and I'm the king of the world. And so the wheels started coming off when I had solved my financial problem. So my purpose was solved, and I didn't truly love what I was doing. And basically fell into an existential crisis of, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? And I tried different things, and I tried to say, I'm going to take a day off a week. Well, then I just learned to be more efficient and do all the work I was doing in 5 days in 4 days. And keep in mind, orthopedics is, it's very procedure driven, and you're paid based off of how many procedures you do. So, and it's eat what you kill. So it's a very productivity driven thing. And I had never taken more of a week of vacation off. And my wife convinced me to take a 4-week vacation. This is about 10 years in.
Wow. That's a great vacation in a great way.
And because I was like, well, if you take more than, you take 5 days off and you get both weekends. If you do more than that, people think you're in rehab or something. So it's like, I'm never taking, I'm never taking more than enough. So we take a 4-week trip to Australia, and I freaked out about it for the 6 months leading up to it, but set it up and went. And about 2.5 weeks in, I just separated enough that I had an awakening of, what the hell am I doing? I'm miserable doing this. I don't have to do this the rest of my life. Or why don't I think about doing something? So I'm walking through the outback with some lady on a trail, and I'm telling her my problems, this random woman in Australia. And she said, well, why don't you come practice here? I said, what are you talking about? She goes, we need orthopedic surgeons. And I said, really? And I wasn't even thinking about it. So that night we drive to Melbourne, and I'm sitting in a bar with my computer, and I just start looking at jobs for orthopedics, and I find a job in New Zealand, which is Australia's neighbor. And it says, we accept American medical licenses. So I email the guy. While I'm at the bar, he emails me back and says, hey, you want to interview next week? And I said, okay. So I go home, and we get back to the States, and I interview, and he says, when can you start? And I go to my wife and I say, I want to move around the world and try to practice orthopedics in a different country, New Zealand. And my wife almost killed me.
Just like, I pushed you to go to Australia, and now She's like, and because we went to Australia and you talked to some Australian women in the outback, we now have to move to New Zealand.
Yeah, that was pretty much sums it up. However, it wasn't as kind as you just said it.
Sure. I'm sure there were some choice words included.
Yeah. But she also knew how miserable I had become, and I was probably pretty miserable to live with at that point. And so I went to my practice and said, I'm leaving. I don't know if I'm ever coming back. And and if you look on the map, New Zealand's almost as far as you can possibly get away from the, North Carolina. But
Yeah.
but it was also metaphorically possibly as far as I could get away from this thing that I was doing. And we were there for a year and a half, and it was terrific. I flourished, my kids flourished, my wife, after she adjusted to it, flourished, and she was actually able to start practicing medicine in a different way. And she had some realizations there about different ways to practice. And about a year and a half there, I said, okay, let's go back to the States and try to do it a different way. And that's when I got back and went back to my same practice, and the same shit started all over again. And within being back for a year and a half, I said, this is not for me. And I went down my different path, and we'll get into that. So that's my orthopedic story in a nutshell.
So, first of all, like, such an interesting path that, that you've shared so far, but it's amazing that this all started because of your hardships, because you faced hardships, you were then led into this career that it takes true grit to be someone like an orthopedic surgeon where you're going to have to be on call all the time. You're working extensive hours, you're dedicating your life to this job, but you have like this purpose and you had this reason. Like, not many people I feel like can actually do it for as long as you've done it. Especially just like going through residency. A lot of people I feel like quit because it is extremely hard, or switch. And so that's amazing that you had this story that kind of gave you this purpose to keep going through this career. Because if you didn't face those hardships, maybe you wouldn't be in that type of career.
Yeah, and that's true. I mean, and I would say my parents, that's one thing they taught me is you can work your way out of a lot of things. So grit was part of that for me. So I'm incredibly
Wow.
thankful for
So, follow-up question for you, just briefly. You go to Australia, you go to New Zealand, you begin practicing in New Zealand. What were the differences between being in orthopedic surgery in the States versus there? Were there differences? Was the approach different? Was that kind of the beginning of your story and what kind of was starting to open your eyes to a different way of healing?
Yeah, it's drastically different. A lot of it was the people. The people in New Zealand are just, the US, the funny thing about the US is very up and down. The highs are very, very high. The lows are very, very low. It's either the sky is falling or this is the best day of my life. And New Zealand, they're very even keel. So even their worst days, it happens. And so the great part was those lows. So when some horrible complication occurs, they say, well, you know what, we'll work through it. And we needed to level out, and we had become a bit of stress addicted, and we just needed a structure that allowed us to just be at peace for a while. And New
Mhm.
Zealand did that. Now, keep in mind, New Zealand is a nationalized health system. So they have a two-tiered system, kind of like Canada. And so I was in the public system. So the nice thing is people aren't losing their entire wealth and livelihood because they have an orthopedic injury, which happens routinely in the United States. Um, Incredible support around the country from other surgeons. The level of competition, just the cutthroat attitude that we have in the surgical world in the United States, just didn't exist. And probably the biggest thing that struck me is the US acts like its healthcare system and its doctors are just these incredibly trained that are better than everyone else. And what I realized is these guys in New Zealand could out operate most guys I ever trained with. And they were not egotistical about it. You could fit multiple heads in the same room, which is different than the guys I was practicing with here. And so it was exactly what I needed at that time to sort of center me. So it was a wonderful experience. And the best thing for me is no call and no weekends while I was there.
Wow. And that, I'm sure, was just night and day contrast. Like, that in itself. I think America's work culture is just so different because we have such a hustle culture. People work around the clock. It's very normal to work like 60 to 80 hours a week here. Like that's not anything unusual, but you go to other countries and they enjoy, like, if you've heard of the blue zones,
Oh yeah.
they enjoy their family time and their time away from work. And like that's how you have longevity. When you live in constant stress and high cortisol, it takes away from like the quality of life. So it's interesting there that you say that you didn't have to work around the clock. And, in America, it's just such a normal thing. But what is the I guess, like, what you experienced working in public healthcare, I guess the assumption in America is that public healthcare isn't all that great because people assume that you don't have quality doctors. What is your experience working in public healthcare? Do you think that there is a difference in the quality of care?
Yeah, absolutely. The issue is not quality. Quality of care was excellent. The issue is access to care and timing. So the key is if you need something done in New Zealand, the people who need it done first are going to get it done first. Or if you have an urgent issue, you get pushed to the front. But if you have a non-urgent issue, you're going to wait. And you have to partial care like that if you're going to have a nationalized system. And Americans are so intolerant of waiting that no American would say, well, I need a knee replacement. There's no way I'm going to wait 6 months because someone has a horrible trauma and needs this service first. But the New Zealanders get that. And so the quality was excellent and people understood, okay, you know what? I'm not going to have to pay for this, but I might have to wait 6 months. And you hear, the same thing in Canada, but keep in mind, I'd be in practice and a woman would get worked into my schedule who was 82 years old and came to see me and got worked in the schedule because she had knee pain. And I'd say, how long have you had knee pain? And she's like 3 or 4 hours. And she's at a subspecialist orthopedic surgeon's office in 3 or 4 hours. So that's abusive care. And that's kind of what happens here. And so it solves that. Nationalized systems don't solve all the problem, but quality was definitely not the issue.
So when you came back to America and went back to your practice, did you try to implement this care system of where if it's not urgent, then we're gonna put you on a 6 month wait list or whatever that looks like? Did you try to implement that here? And if so, what was the reaction?
Yeah, that's a great question. So my idea was, you know what? I've calmed down, I slowed down. I'm going to try to take this idea of practice and bring it to the States. And I attempt this. And of course, I go back to this group, which is still highly productivity driven, procedurally driven. And it was continued friction as soon as I got back in regards to that. And, there's a list that comes out every month of the top producing guy all the way down to the bottom in order of production. And it's almost like a shaming thing of,
Yeah.
so doing that is a blow to my ego. I'm dealing with that, knowing, I was the number 2 producer out of 80 guys, and now I'm down to the bottom. And also it struggled because my colleagues were practicing the same way. So if we'd see each other's patients, it didn't quite fit cohesively with the way my colleagues were practicing. And so it didn't take me long to realize this is not going to work. Trying to bring this over to the US way. And the reality is that the more procedures I perform, the more money I make. And I'm fighting that. So I'm trying to not do these procedures that haven't been shown to be beneficial. And we know that there's holistic approaches that can do just as well. Yet I'm pushed to do more procedures because that floats the bottom line. And the incentives are just so screwed up here that basically the sicker you keep people, the more money you're going to make here is the reality of it.
So, was there like a defining moment, a definitive moment that pushed you to walk away from this altogether?
There were a couple.
Mhm.
I will say I didn't really find holistic medicine or holistic approach. It found me. And that was in the name of my wife, who is a force of nature. And I had 3 children, all with chronic disease, eczema, asthma, ADHD, seasonal allergies, you name it. They were all on medications. They were all sick. And my wife, who's a pediatrician, said, this is not our story. This is not what's going to happen. And I'm a pediatrician, but there's got to be a different way than just throwing more medications. And so she's the one that came home one day and went into our pantry and threw everything out and said, we're not going to live this way anymore. For me, it was sitting at dinner with my wife one day, and I just had this realization: what am I doing? I'm living someone else's life. I don't want to do this. And watching how inspired she is doing what she does at this point, and she has opened her own integrative holistic practice. And I just had this moment of saying, I have another chapter, and it's doing something in a different way, and I can do this. And I will admit that I had worked so hard for so long and saved up enough that I had put myself in a financial situation that I could go venture out and look for other opportunities.
Wow.
And and so what happened with me was I met an old medical school colleague, and he said, "Well, I have a job where I go work 1 week a month, and then I have 3 weeks off." And I said, "Wow, that's interesting to me." And it turns out that they need orthopedic surgeons all over the country. There's a shortage of orthopedic surgeons, which of course added to my guilt of leaving orthopedic surgery, the fact that there's such a shortage. And so I would fly to Muncie, Indiana. This is once I left my practice here. Once I realized it wasn't working out, I would work for a week straight, but then I had 3 weeks off. And during those 3 weeks, I was just antsy. I'm a high energy guy, and I was antsy. And so my wife has this practice doing very well, and she has a 6 month wait to see her. And I said, well, maybe I could do something to help these people that are waiting to see you for 6 months. And I said, what's a common problem that you're seeing that people are waiting to see you for? And she said, childhood eczema. So eczema, the skin condition, 20% of kids have eczema. And I said, all right, well, do you have a typical algorithm you follow to holistically sort of manage these? Do you affect diet and toxic substances in the house, and what can you do? She goes, yeah. So during these 3 weeks I had off, I started building an online program just to try to help the people who were waiting to see her. And I said, and launched it to them. And so we sold it for, a low amount and said, hey, while you're waiting, try these things. We could possibly get you better. Well, that started to grow, and I started to build the program bigger, and people started buying. And then people who weren't waiting to see her were asking to buy it. And it got to the point where I said, if if we start selling enough of this, and we can heal people this way, and people will pay us to help them holistically change their lives, then maybe I can just be done with orthopedics. And that happened about a year and a half of doing that 1 week a month. And
Wow.
that's about almost 4 years ago now, and I've never looked back.
That's incredible. I How many people, Peyton, do you know with eczema? I know several.
I know a lot of people with children that have eczema,
That
specifically
too.
younger children, and that's when I feel like I see it the most. So, this is off it is on topic, but what what do you think that the common denominator is for all of these children having eczema?
Yeah, and this leads to what my one of my second aha moments is that so eczema is the first autoimmune disease that shows up in life. It shows up at 3 to 6 months of age. And by the way, it's a little bit ironic that the orthopedic surgeon's sitting here talking about childhood eczema, which is a completely separate thing. But anyhow, and so keep in mind, currently 1 in 2 kids have an autoimmune disease, and within 10 years, 100% of kids will have an autoimmune disease. So 1 in 2. The US has the highest rates of childhood autoimmune disease in the world.
Wow.
And it starts at 3 to 6 months of age. And what I realized is once you get eczema, it's the first step along getting asthma, then getting food allergies, and ADHD, diabetes, all these autoimmune problems that occur. And it's the first one. And it's nature's way of throwing up this big thing on your skin, which is like a red flag or saying, hey, something's wrong. There's something here. I mean, how great is it that it shows you on your skin? Whereas things like diabetes, you don't see it, right? But
Right.
nature's telling us something's wrong, and it's going to tell us right away. And yet we ignore it, or we just slap more steroids on it. And so what I realized is these are the people I can help. When I saw the 40-year-old who was morbidly obese and knees were shot and I had nothing to offer them, I said, man, if I could have gotten to them earlier. And so my big aha moment was, if I can start changing the lives at 3 to 6 months, they'll never have to see a guy like me when they're 40 because their knees are shot. And once I realized that all we're doing is dealing with a symptom, band-aiding the problem, not getting to the root cause. And can you get any more root cause than the first autoimmune disease to show up in the country that has the worst problem of it in the world? That was an opportunity to me and a big aha moment.
Yeah. I mean, that's pivotal, right? To be on the side where you're doing emergency care, where preventative care doesn't exist, and now you see something that your wife is doing where you have the opportunity to do that. And I like that you said where hopefully they don't have to see you because they live such a healthy life. Is preventative care, do you think that that topic is discussed enough in medical school?
Yeah. You know, the medical system, obviously, I feel like in the last 5 years, the veil sort of has been lifted. When you get into the system has a very direct goal. It's to put blinders on you and get you through the system, and you come out a loyal, obedient doctor who puts their head down and just practices and writes the scripts and essentially toes the company line till you retire when you're 65, 70.
Mm.
And everything is geared toward keeping you in that. And so prevention is sort of a joke in medical school. They don't teach you anything about nutrition. You know, most medical schools, I think only 12% of medical schools offer any nutritional training whatsoever. The majority offer none. And so we really had none. Um, and to say that they're teaching you healthcare is a misnomer. What we have in the United States is sick care. That's what we do. We do very little toward health and more toward once you're sick. And so they never taught us that kind of stuff in medical school. Keep in mind, a large portion of medical school funding is from the pharmaceutical companies. And the pharmaceutical companies obviously have a vested interest in teaching you pharmacology. So I think we took 200 hours of pharmacology or something like that, teaching all these drugs, not how do you not have these people on drugs in the first place? I
Yeah.
spent so many hours learning every hypertensive medication and realize after 30 years, a hypertensive medication may buy you a few more months on your life, but 30 minutes of moderate exercise a few times a week buys you years on your life. How many times has your primary care doctor gone for you? Here's our two treatments. One gets years off of your life, will cost
Yep.
nothing. Here's a hypertensive medication that you're going to have to be on for the rest of your life with all sorts of side effects. We're never taught that.
So, yeah, exactly. Like the preventative care isn't a step in medicine. It always seems like come to us when you're sick, come to us when your bones are broken, whatever it is, that's when we can help you. And I've noticed it in my personal health when I go in for my yearly physical, they do the blood work and I have higher cholesterol, not high enough to put me on anything. So the doctor says nothing. I can see my levels. I've been like, I've pulled all my Novant charts and I put it in an Excel sheet so I can track it. So I know what's increasing over the years, but they're not going to tell me. So like I have to do the work of a doctor because no one's telling me anything. But when something's high enough, then they bring it up. But I've noticed things are getting higher. And then my doctor says, don't worry about it. But like technically it's borderline, but like not enough to do anything about it. So like that's an action step where we can take preventative care. Like, hey, patient, your LVL levels are getting higher over the past 4 years. If it continuously goes this way, and it looks like it probably is because this is a trend, like this is what we can do, but we don't see that in the medical system anymore. So do you actually think that most doctors believe in the treatments that they prescribe? Because as you said, like, you're there to fix broken bones and you're just trying to do as many surgeries as you can. So this probably goes for the same within the medical system. So do you think that most doctors truly believe in the treatments they prescribe, or are they just following protocols and trying to hit quotas?
I think doctors do in general, have good intentions. I think they do want to help people. I think that they're largely ineffective for a couple reasons. I think the system has so indoctrinated them into saying, well, what's the science behind that? Right. And then they have said, well, if something's not a placebo controlled, double blind study, randomized, then you really can't take anything from that. Well, those studies, what are they great for? They're great for medications. That's the ideal thing to find out which medication works. And so the problem is they sit there and say, well, I'm trying to be scientific about this because it's very hard to do a food study because there's so many confounders and variables. So you can't say you either took this placebo pill or you took our pill. And so what the system has said is they've pushed doctors, and this is largely because of the pharmaceutical companies also supporting the FDA and the NIH. So they get the studies that they need done. So the doctors are told, well, if you're going to be scientific, doctor, you need to do our medication because that's the one that has the great science behind it. So they basically weaponized the research system so that they can push that agenda. So I think it's that. I think docs to sit down and truly do a root cause analysis of someone's medical history. It's complex. It takes time. You really have to get to know someone, and there's a psychological aspect to it. They don't have the time for that. I mean, there's a shortage of primary care doctors, and they have 10 minutes to see you. It's much quicker to write a script and say sayonara than it is to launch into an hour-long root cause analysis of the problem to where you're really going to institute change.
So really, this is something that it seems like it falls on the medical systems that are pressuring and putting these quotas for doctors to meet that just seem unfair. We shouldn't be paying people by quotas.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. And believe me, doctors are not innocent in this too. I mean, you have to be an active learner. And the biggest thing docs is they won't even consider the conversation and say, hey, is there another way to think about this? For a moment, could you just step over to the side and just look at this from a different point of view? They they are so absolute that they won't even talk about it. That's my issue, that they seem to be so closed-minded, yet, doctor in Greek is teacher, and to be a great teacher, you need to be a lifelong learner. And I feel like they have closed their mind to this side of it. So I think docs carry this load too. They're not innocent in it. Yeah, there's a systematic problem, but the docs are responsible too.
Yeah. It's such an interesting thing that you're saying, right? It's almost as though this degree has made them feel so superior to the fact that they are almost in some ways incapable of humbling themselves to see if they can learn from the patient in front of them, right? There's that disparity between education and schooling. Medical care, the medical school system seems to have such an infatuation with schooling versus education. And when you create that education, what you do is you create free thinkers who are more interested in doing studies and looking at the patient as a whole. And if you looked at the patient as a whole, potentially they wouldn't need to be so worried about the quota, because the amount of people that would be requiring sick care would go down if they educated versus schooled. Would you agree with that statement?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think part of it is medical school. It's not nothing there, or even through medical training. It's not anything you're learning is so complex. It's the volume of stuff you have to learn. The volume is immense, and every what is it, few months, knowledge doubles, right? So it's exponential, and so I think doctors get so overwhelmed that they just shut down and say, this is what I learned 20 years ago, and they stick with that, and they truly stop being active learners. And so not only is the disparity in how education versus schooling, but there's a disparity, and doctors are incredibly unhealthy. I'll go to a conference that's a traditional medical MD conference, and it's mystifying people how overweight, smokers, just all sorts of medical issues. And then I'll go to a conference that chiropractors and naturopaths and other fields, unbelievably healthy, fit, exercising during breaks. It's a drastically different thing. So there's a disparity even how people take care of themselves. And I experienced that. I mean, I started, one of the reasons I said my wife dragged me into holistic approaches is that, I'm practicing, I'm working my ass off 60, 70 hours a week, and my body's starting to fail. So we're supposed to go on a trip at one morning, and I can't get out of bed. And my wife's like, get out of bed. And I'm trying to get out of bed, and I'm coughing up blood. And, and this is in the midst of when I was in surgery, I would at times go over, vomit in the trash can, finish vomiting, and then go back and keep doing surgery, and then operate the rest of the day with continuous vomiting sessions in the trash can, rather than ever saying, you know what, maybe the best thing to do right now is not continue to operate on people. But this was standard in my world, and doing anything else would be a sign of weakness. And so, I wake up coughing up blood and I've got double pneumonia, and I thought I was living, a healthy lifestyle. And one of my biggest realizations was I would tell my patients, they'd come in and see me, and I'd say, you got to lose 50 pounds. I can't do any replacement. Lose 50 pounds, come back and see me. And I look back now, I'm just absolutely ashamed of myself that was my approach. And this was standard because what orthopedics was supposed to be was musculoskeletal health. Well, weight is a massive part of musculoskeletal health. Your knees are incredibly weight sensitive. And so rather than guiding and helping these people along on how to do that and approaches and different things and considering how the diet might affect their health or how their lifestyle might affect their health, I said, see me when you've lost the weight. And it was so dismissive, and that's standard in our world. So these people are just lost. And so when my body started breaking down, and I finally made the realization where my diet and my lifestyle had a drastic effect on my, because I thought a calorie in was a calorie out, and all calories were created equal. And probably my biggest understanding was calories are not created equal. And once I understood that, my world changed.
So going back to the surgery part, because I do want to circle back to, your health and what that looks like. But did you witness cases where surgery was recommended when a holistic approach could have solved the problem? I'm sure you have, but if so, like how many do you think that you saw a week that just could have been fixed holistically?
Many. And not only did I see it in my colleagues, I was implicit in part of it. So, probably the best example, because I brought it up, is knees. So, degenerative arthritis in knees is an epidemic. It's, we know that the majority of Americans are overweight, and the knee is an incredibly sensitive a joint to weight change. There's about 5 times body weight that goes through your knee joint when you're doing activity. So, a 10-pound weight gain is a 50-pound stress gain across your knee. And so the knee is an incredibly sensitive joint to weight changes. So what's the approach to that? Teaching people, understanding that, getting them on regimens that are low impact exercise, teaching them about how not all calories are created equal, getting them on a program to change their whole metabolic health and guiding them through that all the way till while their knees get better. Whereas I would say, well, we can go in there and clean it out, a clean out. Now, we know that clean outs for arthritic knees do absolutely nothing. There's a very famous study done at the VA. You can almost do anything at the VA. I don't know how they get away with these things. And at the VA, they took people who had arthritis in their knees, and half of them, they just made the cuts to do an arthroscopy where you put the scope in and clean out their knee. The other half, they actually did the arthroscopy. So they got these people to agree that they were either going to have sham surgery, so make the cuts, but not actually do the surgery, or have the surgery, and they weren't going to tell them. So this is a true randomized, placebo controlled with sham surgery. And what they found was the people who had sham surgery versus the real surgery for this had no difference in their results. So we know that this procedure has no effect. But you know what? Whether it helps them or not, I get paid. And here's the reality. So many people who ultimately need a knee replacement, you go in and you scope and you clean out their knees. This is what guys would do. You wait 90 days because that's how long they're in a global period, whereas if you do another procedure, you don't get paid for it. Once they're in day 91, you do their knee replacement. So then you chalk up another procedural fee for the knee replacement. So we had guys in the community who did that specifically, saying, well, I was just going to see if I could buy them a little time with the clean out. That's
When it's something that they know that already doesn't work.
That is, I wish I could say I was shocked, but I'm not surprised. So
It happens in so many areas of the medical field, right? Like with so many medications and procedures, that it's all a placebo, and they have tests done that show that the results don't make a difference.
health is treated as a business, and businesses like to make money. And if pharma, there's an incentive, there's all of these different factors at play. You've got big food in on it. You were talking about I thought a calorie was a calorie. And what's so interesting is there's a time where, I wasn't aware of these things either. But I grew up in a home where my mom always cooked our food, home cooked, and she still says now, if I'd known what I know today when you guys were kids, I would have still done things a little differently. But she still made all of our food, did all of these things. I go to college, all of a sudden, I feel like I'm kind of losing my mind. Why? Because I'm eating a ton of processed food. I'm worried about the number of calories I'm consuming rather than the quality. But what's mind-boggling to me at this season, in that season of life that I was in, was it's all a very obvious answer. Of course, a high quality home cooked meal is better than going and getting Panda Express in the food hall. Like that is a very obvious answer. But it did not, it completely escaped me. I was wondering why I was having all of these issues. So, is it possible with everything that you've said that modern medicine is actually shortening our lifespans rather than extending them?
Well, we know that, the lifespan in the US has gone down in the last
Mhm.
first time in 200 something years of our country.
Yeah.
And so I would argue that for a long time, we haven't been living longer. We've been dying longer. I mean, that's essentially what's happening. And if you look at the last 20 to 30 years of life, they've become a crap of polypharmacy, dozens of medications, and that life quality during that time is horrendous. And you talk about your experience with food just, in college. I would argue that one of the most unhealthy places I've eaten for 30 years was in hospitals. I don't know if you've ever been to a hospital cafeteria. The food is
Still,
absolute crap.
Yeah.
my grandfather was hospitalized at some point last year, and I distinctly remember I happened to be home at the time, and we were trying to smuggle him in different food. And they wanted him to finish his food. So we would take it and put it in containers and walk out of the hospital with it and give him a whole different meal to eat because the food was so terrible. We were like, you shouldn't be eating this at all. But they wanted him to finish the crappy food to prove that he could go home. But the crappy food was not going to make him feel better. So we gave him different food.
Exactly. And you spot on. And so when we think about healing and all these important factors of healing with quality proteins and what we know are parts of food that are anti-inflammatory where they need to be, these are huge. And the medical community ignores that. And whether that's just from lack of education, which I think is a huge part of it, um, versus, if, it's one of these things, if I would have known then what I know now. But my mission now is, our mission statement for our business is to educate, inspire, and empower families to heal themselves with less medication and supportive communities. And so the first word is educate in our mission, because I think that's the first step. And that's physicians and families. And I think it's just getting the word out. And so still a grassroots movement. It's definitely growing. And I just finished Casey Means' book, Good Energy, which I thought was a great book, and you guys may have read it as well. And I love what they're doing, pushing a similar, she loves surgery, and so I see similarities in our sort of parallel lives, but pushing the education part. And if you get some people to open their eyes and you get the veil to lift, then that's just another person that pushes the movement forward, I think.
I love that.
It's interesting what you talk about, like how a profit and quota just, they have their hands and they have this pull on modern medicine. And I do feel like insurance is a large factor as well, because insurance is for profit. It used to be nonprofit when Blue Cross started. I don't think it was Blue Shield just yet when it first started, but Blue Cross, was a nonprofit industry. There wasn't a lot of health insurance. It's interesting. We talked about this before, but I asked my grandparents, growing up, when they had my dad, like, did you guys have health insurance? And she's like, no, we didn't have health insurance. That wasn't a thing back then. And then it started to become a profitable business. Everyone expanded. Prices started inflating because insurance could make more money, and medical practices would accept the bill because they knew that insurance companies would pay for it. So that's how prices just started inflating. Insurance went up and it became this huge business. So if insurance companies had no control over healthcare, how do you think the medical world would change?
Yeah. The day many years ago when the insurance company came between the doctor and the patient and said, you know what, let us help collect that for you, was the day was our road to destruction. So the day that, number one, insurance got between it, because before then, everyone had skin in the game, the same. And now once the insurance companies came in, well, they took the patient out of the decision making, particularly for the financial part. Well, then the employer came in between. So then you have the doctor, the patient, the employer, and the insurance company all jockeying for different positions. And you're right. And the insurance companies are now for profit, just like almost every part of medicine is. And again, the fact that the sicker we stay, the more profitable the majorities of these businesses are, is alarming. And the fact that shareholders stand up and clap when there's horrible reports of childhood obesity rates because they're going to approve Ozempic for 6-year-olds, and that the companies are celebrating horrible disease processes because they know it's going to be profitable.
Yeah.
So the insurance company issue, insurance in general, is such a quagmire at this point that that I think ultimately will likely get to some sort of two-tiered system where the government will take over part of this, and they need to. But it's the only business where if I bill $5,000, the insurance company goes, "Okay, that's great. Here's 800." Where what you bill and what you get paid are completely detached and have nothing to do with each other. And so it's ended up with this massive inflation of, well, I could bill $28,000 and they might pay me 200. And because of that, there's plenty of money in the system. That's the thing. There's plenty of money to do all these things we're talking about, to really get, not do sick care, but change to healthcare and preventative measures and spend this money before people get sick. But obviously some of these incentives are going to have to change. And part of that is the insurance piece, because obviously they're profitable. They're answering to shareholders. They're trying to keep their margins, and that's not going to work long term.
How inflated do you think prices were in the orthopedic world? Like a surgery, how much they billed to how much they actually probably costed with, having salary or people on staff to do the surgery and the things that you need to actually do it.
Well, that's where, and now keep in mind, the hospitals are also involved in this. So for example, I had a patient who I did an outpatient. So she came in and went home the same day, shoulder replacement. And a shoulder replacement's a big procedure, but we did it in one day. It's about a 2-hour procedure. She was in the recovery room for an hour and went home. And this is in one of the big hospital systems here in Charlotte. And she came to me a week later for her follow-up visit. And she said, "I got a bill that I would like to talk to you about." And I said, "Sure." So she brings in her bill, and I said, "What is this?" She goes, "This is the bill from my surgery." And I said, "You're kidding me." The bill was for $82,000. I said, by the way, the surgeon's fee for this, which includes 3 months of aftercare, all the appointments, all the follow-up, everything, I think was $1,200. And
So it's like, where is that all going to?
right. And I will tell you, the rep in the case, so the equipment rep, so you're associated with, or you used to be associated with a guy who was an equipment rep. In that case, the rep made more than I did. The rep for the company who brings in the shoulder replacement made more money on the case than I did. So that's another thing to consider. So, so that's just an example of an inflated cost of, they're trying to get the money from there to try to pay for if they're doing indigent care on the other side. So there's all this cost shifting, which also adds to the inflation of what the insurance companies are doing.
So the patient is just, fronting the cost for all of these things for profit, to make this industry desirable, because, the healthcare industry working in there is volatile. I think, doctors experience it, nurses, it is just volatile. It's understaffed. So I think it's harder to get people to want to stay in that. So what makes people want to stay? Money. So, they feed, they raise these prices, and then patients have to front the costs.
Yeah. If you look at the hospital systems in general, it's not nursing salaries, OR staff, where the hospital systems have ballooned is middle management. If you just look at the number of middle management and even the C-suite portion of hospitals, what their salaries have done. So doctors have been coming down for about 5 to 10 years, right? Just not hugely, but with inflation slowly coming down. Whereas middle management and C-suite of hospitals have skyrocketed, and that's where the majority of the cost is. So
Wow.
it's not the people doing the direct patient care. Those are not the ones where pays and stuff have been the issue. It's the middle
So
management
it's
as well.
crazy that, you go to school to be an orthopedic surgeon and it turns out management is actually the real gold mine.
Exactly.
It's humbling.
Tough to swallow. Yeah.
That's tough. Okay, so and I don't know the answer to this question. Are there more doctors today than there were 50 years ago?
There are more, but as a percentage of the population, there's a shortage.
So, is there truly a shortage of doctors or is there a shortage of healthy individuals?
So, well, number one, the biggest problem with doctors is the distribution.
Right.
So doctors want to live in San Diego and they want to live in New York, but they don't want to live in the middle. So you have drastically overpopulated, drastically underpopulated there.
Yeah.
You have doctors leaving practice early. So I'd argue that you have both. You have a
Right.
lot unhealthier population. You have essentially fewer functional people where you need them from a practitioner standpoint.
Sure.
So it's a double whammy essentially.
Yeah. Also, rural areas tend to have poor health in general, which is probably where you need the most doctors.
And you don't get them. Right.
Right. Because they don't live there. Fair enough. Okay. I was
And,
just a follow up.
and
I
so
was just curious.
one of the wonderful things about what we do, about holistic approaches, is that you can do this remotely. I can be on a screen with someone and I don't have to be doing procedures on them. I don't have to be feeding them medications. I can do this remotely from anywhere. Interestingly, if I wanted to manage you holistically as a doctor and you were my patient and you lived in South Carolina and I'm in North Carolina, I would be breaking interstate medical laws by trying to holistically manage your problem on screen. Because we are 50 small countries when it comes to medical licensing in the United States. So
That seems so broken.
I am handcuffed by helping you, even though I could help you in Iowa where you desperately need me in some small town. I am breaking the law by helping you in telemedicine. Unless you come physically.
That we're so separated. So etiquette medical system.
Telehealth calls only work if you're still seeing a person within your state lines.
Correct. Or if they've come seeing you physically, they can see you physically and you establish care, then you can see them telemedicine, but then you have to see them generally once a year in person to do the same exact thing you're doing telemedicine. Because again, we're 50 small countries.
That kind of defeats the entire purpose. Like, should you and your wife manage this? Because you guys do have this holistic practice. Are all of your patients in North Carolina?
So the patients we are treating are in North Carolina. We can do coaching for patients without.
Coaching and educating. Okay.
So it gets in a little bit of the semantics, right? So this is a big gray area if you were a naturopathic doctor, if you're a chiropractor, if you're a nurse, if you have no credentials whatsoever, you can do this to anyone around the United States and have no issues. But because I'm a doctor, I actually can't do it. So you actually have more freedom to help people as a non-doctor because of this rule than you do as a doctor. So we set it up as coaching because coaching is not it, but it's a big gray area because you can get someone to argue, well, are you treating them or coaching them? Well, that's a big legal gray area. So yeah, we take some risk with that.
Right. Areas can be great for this specific thing when you are on the good side of wellness.
You know what? If teaching people to live a healthier life and teaching them how to get outside and eat better, if that's the sword that we're going to go down on, I'm willing to fall on that sword. If that's how we're going to go down,
I think the world would be a better place if more people were willing to fall on that sword, I think.
Agreed.
So knowing all of this, because I feel like we've just touched on all the things that I get really excited about, but we walk down memory lane, like you just talking about your path and what led you here, how do you feel now in your career, now that you have this sense of time freedom, independent thinking, and being able to actually help people live a better life instead of fix their, broken wounds. How do you feel now?
Well, the nice thing is I have no problem falling asleep Sunday night. I'm not conflicted anymore. I don't have this conflict of, is this ethical? Is this not ethical? Am I doing the right thing? I have absolutely no question that I'm doing the right thing. So that is the most liberating thing, to know that you're doing the right thing for people, and you're making long-term changes in these people's lives. And you I'm getting them when they're young. So it is night and day about just feeling great about what I'm doing. That's the biggest part of it. And I've watched my family make those changes too. My kids thriving and healthy. And, I missed most of my kids growing up till I left surgery. And now my kids are gotten older, but the last 5 years I've been present. I've been around. I've been a different person. And so my family has seen the benefits of it drastically.
It's incredible. And especially just being able to build a business with your wife and do something that you're changing people's lives truly. Like, you're starting young and being able to hopefully touch young lives so they live a healthier, longer life. So being able to do that, spend more time with your family, help your wife with her business and expand that. I think that's incredible. And what a shift, from where you started in a gymnasium living there during the summer to here.
Yeah, it's ironic. I work with so many moms at this point, because we do with kids, and the moms are usually the leaders of healthcare in their family. And so I went from orthopedic surgery, which is the most male dominated specialty in the world. It's in the United States, it's 99%. It was 99% as of last year, male. And now I'm on a team. I think we have 20 some odd people, and I'm the only man. So I've had to shift a little bit of my gruff surgical world attitude, and be much more uh, a little softer with my folks in regards to the macho of orthopedic surgery versus,
Sure.
well, let's change lives and be with the moms. I'm actually much happier where I am now. So
So, do you have any advice for others who are in medicine and feel stuck but are scared to leave?
absolutely, you're taught in medicine, again, put the blinders on, don't look up. But my God, life is too short. If you're not happy and you don't want to do this, and you're wondering, why am I living someone else's life? And you're miserable every Sunday night, there's options for you. Physicians just don't understand all the capabilities they have of managing people, of taking in complex situations and simmering them down, of understanding systems. And doctors don't appreciate all the knowledge and ability that they have, that they can start something else, they can do it differently, that there's opportunities, that there's way, way more than the traditional system of medicine. And I think sometimes they think that there's nothing else that they can do. And I just wanted to let them know there is a world of opportunities, and it's never too late to change a chapter. And I left, again, what is still the most lucrative field of medicine, at least in the top two, and have been successful, but doing something that I love, and I feel like I'm doing the right thing. So you're never too late to do that. The second little piece of advice I'll give, and this is, we find men tend to be very much slower to this than women. And even in our programs, we struggle with dads or husbands who just haven't gotten this yet. And they're slower to come to the realization. And so I tell them they could start with start slow. But one thing I tell every person to do is, when they're at the grocery store, as a dad or as a man, look at whatever they're buying. And if it has more than 5 ingredients, don't buy it. And if it has added sugar, don't buy it. That sounds very trivial and easy, but just starting there, it's amazing how much it would change what you're taking home. And so for men, you know, I don't understand all these ingredients, and I don't know what, and it's complicated, and I don't know what to buy. And if they just start with those two things, it's amazing the difference that it is making in your life, just as far as your health.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
I think that's so funny that you said that it's men that are a little late to the game on that one. And it's just funny because me and Rachel will like go to the grocery store and we're just like hyper fixated on like flipping it to the back, seeing what's in there. And we're like, oh, I can't pronounce that. I don't want it. Like whatever it is, we automatically look at that.
Our idea of a fun girls' day is going to Whole Foods and walking around and looking at it. We go to Marshall's. We went to Marshall's the other day. We walked around and we just were saying we would never buy these candles. This is toxic cookware. This is non-toxic cookware. I would buy this. I would never buy that. And this is what we do for fun, but we are rare and strange. But um, you know,
It's like window shopping, but really depressing if you just like to actually buy a lot of things.
really depressing. Yeah. Then we end up going back to the Whole Foods section, just like the normal, actual, real food section, and then we actually buy our groceries and leave.
So funny. Well, if it's any consolation, 2 days ago, I spent my Sunday morning in Walmart filming my wife doing healthy swaps that you can find at Walmart. So I'm the 52-year-old ex-orthopedic surgeon who's in Walmart filming my wife doing healthy swaps on Sunday's order.
Husband.
I I know what you're saying.
I make my fiance record me in Costco, so there's
Perfect.
and he refuses to go to the store because he's like, Rachel, I can't do it. So I'm about to share with him your 2 tips. He's like, when you send me to the store, if it's not a really specific list with pictures, I don't know. I don't really know what we're going to do.
It's overwhelming for guys because then they're like, oh my God, I'm going to get the wrong thing. And then you're going to have issues with what I got. And so you end up, in an analysis paralysis. And I'm like,
Yep.
those are the 2 things I found. And once I did with that, it made my life much easier.
Fair enough.
Great advice. Well, John, this has been an amazing conversation. I'm just like fascinated by all of these intricacies of your life that brought you here. So I know other people will find it fascinating. If people want to follow you, do you have a social media? Where do people connect with you at?
So I will say that my wife is sort of the face of the business. I have a face for radio, so I stay behind the scenes, and I kind of let her do that. So if you just follow us at Dr. Anna Maria as our Instagram, and our website's drannamaria.com. Like I said, anything you see on there, I have my fingers on. It might not be my face, but it's probably my words or at least my thoughts. So,
Perfect. Or you're recording it. So
or there you go.
well, thank you so much. Also, Anna's great, by the way, too. Like, I love watching her on social media, and the way that she just gives wellness tips are just amazing. So she's a great follow.
Well, thank you guys, because the more people that do this and push this from a grassroots level, the more we can change. And so you guys are passionate about it, and I love it. So thank you guys for doing what you're doing.
Oh, thank you for coming on. I wish there were so many other questions I wish we could have covered and asked you, but we'll have you come back and we'll talk another time. But thank you so much, John.
Anytime.
Thanks for listening.